Employment Relations Rest Breaks and Meal Breaks Amendment Bill interrupted debate on first reading.
When we were last debating this bill, Darian Fenton was speaking and has 6 minutes remaining. Darian Fenton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, in the intervening day between the beginning of the first reading of this bill and today, we had Workers' Memorial Day, which is a day when we remember all of the workers that have been killed and injured on the job throughout New Zealand and throughout the world. And I was very interested that the Minister of Labour, who has introduced this bill, which is an important health and safety bill, actually, an important health and safety requirement that we have breaks on the job, said that it was a sober reminder that New Zealand continues to lose more than one person each week in fatal workplace accidents, and went on to note that serious accident statistics show there's around 6,000 injuries or accidents in the workplace every year. She went on to say that there's a lot of room for improvement and the government will continue to work with businesses and unions to foster a strong workplace safety culture. Now, I have to say, Mr Speaker, I find it incredibly ironic from those statements that this minister is putting forward a bill that will take away the rights of workers to have a break on the job for rest, to be able to carry up attention to personal business and for refreshment. And that minister was part of the Transport and Industrial Relations Select Committee, Mr Speaker, that heard the submissions on Labour's bill, which this bill actually undermines and completely undoes, and she heard that they voted for it. They voted in favour of it. And yet here we are and doing all that good work. And she heard one particular story that I would like to relay to the House, if I may, Mr Speaker. That's the story of James Joseph, an Indian immigrant worker who came to New Zealand 11 years ago and worked in a Wellington ethnic restaurant. It took him some time to figure out that while he wasn't getting any breaks, rest breaks or lunch breaks or meal breaks or anything else, other workers were getting breaks, so he started to ask questions. When he insisted to his employer that he should have a short break, even though he was working 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then 4:30 to 11 p.m. or later, he wanted to have a short break every 3 hours. He was called a troublemaker and sacked by his employer. After 6 months, he got another job and he raised the work break issue with his new employer. He thought he would be on safer ground because he actually had a written employment agreement, something that had not been given to him in his previous job, and it even had a rest breaks clause, Mr Speaker. It said the employer can arrange rest and meal breaks so they do not cause disruption to clients, customers or production. Now that sounds incredibly like this bill to me, Mr Speaker, because what it says is the power is in the hands of the employer to arrange the breaks when it suits the employer. And poor old James, he went to see his employer, thought, I've got a clause in my contract so I can go and talk about meals and rest breaks, and so he went off to see his employer to talk about it, and he was told by his employer it wasn't possible to have a break because the restaurant was just too busy, so tough, you can't have a break. And after arguing with the employer, James was told he was being insubordinate, and he got the sack again. And so it was for workers like James that Labor introduced the rest and meal breaks legislation. And it's going to be workers like James, the vulnerable, the unorganised, the ununionised, that are going to suffer because this government is determined to take away his rights. Now, the whole point of the law was to ensure that we had minimum requirements for rest, for workers to be able to carry out their personal business or pay attention to their personal needs, and to be able to get refreshments at an appropriate time. And the provisions in the current Act are extremely flexible, Mr Speaker. They provide for 2 10-minute breaks, tea breaks, and a half-hour lunch break, unpaid, for the average type of normal length day. The problem with what the Minister is proposing is it will enable employers to decide whether or not a worker should have a break in the first place, and if they do, how long the break is and when it should occur. It will also allow employers to require workers to work in an unpaid break. Apart from the fact that they might not get one, if they give them one, it's unpaid, they could put restrictions on what they're required to do. And it's very interesting, a whole lot of questions around this particular bill. You know, There's a whole lot of things in here this legislation provides so much uncertainty. And all my dealings with employers for years, they want certainty about what is required. So, one question I have, Mr Speaker, that will come up in the Select Committee is how long does a break have to be? Because the 10-minute requirement is taken away, the half-hour requirement is taken away. So you could meet the requirements of this legislation by having a 1-minute break or a 5-minute break, and the employer gets to decide that. And then there's a test of reasonableness. That's a very hard test to meet. Nobody knows what that means. And I would have thought with this Minister having lectured us at length when she was in opposition about flawed and reckless legislation, we could have expected a whole lot better. So I think that this legislation is going to make things worse, Mr Speaker. It provides many excuses for employers not to give breaks at all. It does provide an excuse to say, well, sorry, we're too busy, no breaks today. What it does is create another health and safety risk. We've got workers dying, 1 worker a week dying on the job every day in this country. Mr Speaker, this bill should not proceed.
Michael Woodhouse.